Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the AME Food Testing Show. Today's guest, Howard Cannon. He's America's most visible restaurant expert witness. He's authored 4 books, given hundreds of seminars and speeches, published in dozens of magazines and newspapers across the country and around the globe. He's been featured and interviewed on Anderson Cooper, Wall Street Journal, Reader's Digest, Fox News, MSNBC, Canadian Public Radio, and many, many others. Since 1987, his firm has been called upon by clients of all types and sizes to provide startup, turnaround, and expert witness services pertaining strictly to restaurants, bars, and hospitality industry matters. Mr. Cannon's books can be found in bookstores such as Barnes & Noble's, Books A Million, Walmart, and Amazon in more than 76 countries around the globe. Mr. Cannon has experience in state, federal, expert witness cases for both plaintiffs and defendants. He is also considered by many to be one of the world's most foremost consultants, analysts, and authorities on restaurants and bars across the United States and in markets around the globe. From startups to turnarounds, from operations to marketing, from advisory to expert witness, Mr. Cannon is called upon by attorneys, insurance companies, judges, banks, investors, board members, restaurant executives, media, and many others to provide an unbiased, clear, and concise opinion as to implement his intensely driven, results-oriented strategies. He's worked in every state across the United States and several countries around the globe with restaurants, ranging from fast food to fine dining. Now, welcome with me, Howard Cannon, to our show. Mr. Cannon?
Hey, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Would you like to add anything to your introduction?
No, I think it was probably way too long, but I appreciate the shout-out, but we appreciate you having us.
Well, Howard, your expertise is particularly relevant given the perfect storm that's coming for food production, food quality, food security, and food safety managers in light of the new Food Safety Modernization Act, and in light of more intensity as far as numbers of cases of litigation on issues related to foodborne pathogens. Can you update us? What are the food safety standards of restaurants in the United States?
Well, I mean, here's the reality, Andy. We should have been more focused on this years and years ago. There are 78 million foodborne illnesses in this country every year, 3,000 deaths. And if you told the average person in the United States that roughly 7 to 8 people die a day in this country from what they eat, they would be shocked. And the reality is the Center for Disease Control, the FDA, the USDA, they've known these statistics for a long time. And now we're at a point where, like you said, government intervention has finally come along and said, listen, we got to clean this up. And so now what you're seeing is, from the consumer's point of view, they're calling for higher standards. The restaurants and bars across the country are going to have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get to those higher standards. But the compliance as it sits currently is really not all that impressive. We've had systems in place, whether it be HACCP, or whether it be just food safety training, etc., but we haven't had the resources, the bodies out in the field actually seeing if the systems were being implemented. So I guess to answer your question, I'm still not too impressed with the compliance levels that are out there. But even more importantly than that, I mean, we spend a ton of time in the articles we write and the speeches we give trying to teach people in the food chain that this is somebody's meal. This is critically important. In fact, if you can find anything more personal, more critically personal than the foods and beverages that they consume, I'd love to hear it. You won't find it. And I would just like to implore those out there in the industry to really step up and understand how critically important this is to make sure our food's safe.
Well, Howard, you've offered compelling energy on the discussion of the food safety standards and the compliance levels generally. What I'm hearing from you, we have a long way to go.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Andy, the reality is and it really comes down to, at least in my mind, it comes down to each member of the food chain. A lot of times you'll hear the terms farms to fork. Well, I take it one step further. I believe farms to fork to stomach, because ultimately, whether you're dealing with the farmer, whether you're dealing with the manufacturer of that particular item, the distributor of that particular item, or the end user at the retail level, the restaurant or bar, hospitality industry establishment, they all have to take responsibility for their role in the process, ensuring temperatures are correct, ensuring that testing is done to make sure that the food is safe and maintained in the proper manner, using the tools that are available, whether it be technology, whether it be system integration, to ensure that the product from what I call farms to stomach, the whole chain of custody is maintained. And for the most part, what you see is it comes down to the individuals in those organizations. You will see certain companies that are absolutely all over it. They're doing a bang-up job. They really connect the dots in every part of their responsibility. And then you'll see another company that barely does anything. Well, then when we end up getting involved with it, with either a state or federal lawsuit, the reality is what we're paid to do is to be an unbiased expert to find out what happened. Well, so we go all the way back through the chain to see who dropped the ball and who's responsible for this person who consumed that food or beverage item getting harmed, and in some instances killed. And needless to say, everybody wants to point the finger at the guy further down the chain. So the restaurant, in many cases, wants to point the finger at the distributor, and the distributor wants to point the finger at the manufacturer, and the manufacturer wants to point the finger at the farmer. And in this day and age of litigation, there are a ton of lawsuits piling up every year dealing with specifically these types of issues.
Well, what you're saying, Mr. Cannon, is that everybody's on the same dime. We're all responsible if we're involved in that food production. Can you give us some examples of the lowest levels of compliance you've seen? Again, no names, but just generally in your experience as an expert witness.
Well, you see it at the restaurant level a lot. You see where they're not maintaining temperatures in coolers or in hot hold units. They're not tracking temperatures. They aren't testing product to make sure that the product was maintained at the proper level. At the manufacturing level and the distribution level, you're seeing not only temperatures, and you see cleanliness issues across the board. But for me, the biggest issues are just pure lackadaisical, non-committed. And, we've spent quite a few years in our articles and speeches trying to engender excitement. Many times it's not the most exciting conversation in the world to be talking about food safety and HACCP and temperature control and that sort of thing. It's sometimes not all that, I guess for lack of a better word, sexy and not all that fun. Well, what we try to do is inspire them with this is someone's meal, the most important happenings in our lives. I don't care if it's weddings, whether it's anniversaries, first dates, homecoming, family reunions, celebration of events, success in your career, success in sports, for that matter, your first kiss. Those happen around meals in the United States. Those happen around food and beverage type environments. And you have an opportunity to really make a good impact and provide somebody a safe environment that they can trust with what they're consuming, or you have an opportunity of ruining their lives forever. And it really comes down to what we want to do is we want to inspire people at every level, from the farmer all the way to the restaurant, to understand this is really, really critically important. And more often than not, I'm still hearing either it's not my problem, or it's not that big a deal, or it's not the way my boss or my father or whatever before me did it. And what my response is every time is, well, yeah, but if they had the tools back then, you don't think they would use it? If they had the technology, you don't think they would have used it? We have that technology now, so I'm not understanding why they're not using it. And now we're starting to see the groundswell where people are getting on board because what they're realizing is it's good for business. It's good for the image and the branding of their company. It's good for the way they ethically want to do business, and it's a matter of teaching them the importance of it. And once we teach them the importance of it, then they usually jump on board.
Well, Howard, your examples are both compelling and realistic for today's market. Do you have any other examples of the highest levels of compliance that you've seen in your expert witnessing?
Yeah, I mean, some of the bigger chains, and you see it in independents on occasion too. I mean, they, deal with their safety programs. They do deal with a lot of meetings on a regular basis. They use the technology they can to, test the product. They're keeping great records. A key to this is chain of custody, making sure you keep records. We've had instances where people have either ordered a mushroom dish at the restaurant level and then that mushroom ends up being toxic and somebody gets harmed. Well, then we have to track all the way back to the field that mushroom came from and what temperatures and controls were used and moisture and all that all the way through the process. We've had instances where, in fact, one of the TV shows I was on recently with Anderson Cooper, they were talking about lettuce and the bacteria that's in lettuce and how it gets cleaned. And ultimately, when we have cases, dealing with lettuce, produce of various kinds, it ultimately comes back to we want to have a chain of custody all the way back to where that item was, birthed, harvested, and then all the way through consumption. And so there are those companies that do a very, very good job of it. And then when they get have a lawsuit of any kind that they're involved in, which if you're in business long enough, you're going to end up with a lawsuit of some kind. And what we try to deal with teaching folks is make sure when that happens that your house is in order. And there are those companies that their house is really, really in order, and then the lawsuit comes and really it ends up not being their liability. It ends up being someone else's in the chain that didn't do their part of the deal. And there's plenty of examples of that. There's plenty of great companies. I sit here and look at them, and I am respectful of how they do it, and I'm in awe with how committed they are and passionate they are about it. But they put the teams in place, the resources in place to ensure the long-term, not only the health of their consumer, but the health of their business. And in many instances, their culture, they might be growing an apple or they might be growing oranges or whatever the case may be, but they're seeing their product sitting on a table in front of the consumer in their mind. And that's what's important to them. They've built a culture around someone is going to consume this, and that someone has family, friends, kids, parents, loved ones, and that's important to us. The other side of it is the folks that aren't in such compliance, and they don't seem to realize how important that putting that food in front of somebody is.
Howard, your comments have documented a resounding truth, and I believe your comments about culture are right on point. Just to let you know, what I do primarily for clients is that I provide microbial testing primarily for fresh green leafy products in the factories and the product is tested using DNA technology, which is cutting edge. And I didn't coordinate with you this, but as you talked about lettuce, they are extremely concerned, these fresh green leafy growers, about their cleanliness, their employee training. The clients that I have are engaging in microbial testing using molecular methodology or DNA testing prior to the release of the product so that no product is released from their facility that hasn't been 100% cleared for the presence of these pathogens. And your comments particularly resound well with me, and my hope is, and again, it's not because I'm in that business, but because I eat every day, is that every food producer will align with your comments.
Well, and I think the other thing they got to understand is some of these lawsuits that come across our desk are $2, $4, $8, $10 million lawsuits. I mean, we've had lawsuits dealing with food consumption issues that were literally $15 and $18 million lawsuits. And ultimately, there's not all that many companies out there that can handle taking that kind of a lawsuit and still be in business tomorrow. And so therefore, if they can use the tools, the testing, so that they have the track record that when it left our facility, it was safe and sound, that's going to help them a ton. And I'm talking millions. That will help them in millions of dollars, because at the unit level, if it's not right at the restaurant level, they're going to end up poking the finger at the guy down the line. And at some point, I think that farmer, that manufacturer, that distributor, they all want to have a system where they can say, well, it wasn't me. When it left here, it was safe. And that's worth a ton of money to them.
Well, Howard, you offer some very practical advice. I'd like to also note for the audience that you are the author. And I've seen these books, and I've always been impressed with the conciseness of this genre of The Complete Idiot's Guide to, and there are a number of topics, but you are the author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Starting a Restaurant. And
that is correct.
That framing, it's very impressive, by the way, and you've sold your books in many jurisdictions, many countries, and many cities. In the event of a food contamination, what is the restaurant's liability?
Well, everybody in the food chain is going to get under the microscope. Again, like I said, there's 3,000 deaths in this country a year, but there's 78 million foodborne illnesses. Some of those turn into lawsuits, some of them don't. But everybody's going to be put under the microscope. And the restaurant will be put under the microscope because they're the ones that, in essence, handed it to the guest. But our role as expert witnesses and our role as investigators into the process is to go all the way back through the food chain to see everyone who basically was not in compliance. Because ultimately what the courts will do and what the lawyers want to do is they want to get everybody on the hook that they can. And ultimately, if all of the members throughout the food chain were not in compliance, they're all going to be on the hook. Versus if one or two of the members through the food chain did their job and they were not negligent in their responsibilities, then needless to say, they get off the hook and they're not responsible for it. The other ones that weren't in compliance will be responsible for it. Well, so of course the restaurants are front and center in that whole picture. There's no doubt about it. But everybody is at risk if they don't do the job the right way.
Fascinating. Well, Howard, I'm going to ask you another question. Hopefully you won't feel like I'm putting you on the spot. You have a company that's been in existence since 1987, Restaurant Expert Witnesses. What are the products and services that your company offers?
Well, Restaurant Expert Witness, we offer unbiased reports, testimony, investigation, strategy as it pertains to state and federal lawsuits, state and federal insurance claims. Basically what happens is either a lawsuit has been filed or it's getting ready to be filed, and what they come to us for is to provide an opinion from an unbiased perspective. So basically we're reading, depositions, and we're reading complaints, and we're reading documents and doing research and tracking down specifically what happened. Now, one of our areas of practice is food contaminations and food illnesses and that sort of thing. But these could be any type of restaurant, bar, hospitality, food manufacturing, food distribution type cases. They could be anything from, lawsuits pertaining to investors or lawsuits pertaining to injuries on the on the property. And then, of course, food contaminations and that sort of thing are part of it. Restaurant Expert Witness is one of our practice areas. Of course, we then deal with startups and turnarounds in the restaurant and bar industry as well as other practice areas.
Well, Howard, you've been a most informative guest, and I'd like to now allow you to conclude your remarks with a summary statement about the food safety standards of restaurants in the United States, food safety in general, as we talked about from the farm to the fork of the guest at a restaurant, and every other point in between. I thought you brushed on liability there a little bit. and also offered advice to food producers and their financial or pecuniary gain when they heighten the standards of their food safety?
Well, I guess I'll try to keep it pretty short. For us, what we're seeing now is a handful of years ago, the only time people came to us is when they had a lawsuit, and they were trying to deal with that lawsuit and us providing an opinion regarding that particular lawsuit. Now we're seeing them come to us prior to getting sued. They're wanting us to help them basically plug all their holes and make sure that they're in compliance so that if a suit happens, they've connected all the dots. And I'd say the same thing to your audience that I say to every one of our clients, which is this is someone's meal, and if it were your kids sitting down to eat it, how much in compliance would you hope that everybody in the food chain would be? For me, it's the hope of hopes that everybody understands how important food and beverage consumption is and how critically important it is that you do your job to be in compliance when it comes to food safety, beverage safety, etc. That would probably be the key to the culture that we want to have people create.
Excellent, Howard. Your comments were, I'm sure, well taken by our audience of food production, food quality, food safety, and food security managers. And it reminds me of when I worked at NASA, there was an old joke where one astronaut was looking at the other as they were getting ready to launch the Apollo project, and he said, the Apollo rocket to the moon, he said, the spacecraft was built by the lowest bidder.
yeah, that's a little scary, isn't it?
So there we are. When you go to a restaurant, they obviously have to make their revenue, but it's our choice as consumers to pick where we. I eat out quite a bit, and it's one of my biggest worries is where, because I do food production inspections. I also help clients, and I've given about probably 75 presentations, and I have to tell you, not every one of them accept me. A lot of them walk me out the door telling me they can't afford it, even though they probably need it more than most. So, well, Howard, you've been an excellent guest, and I allow you to, at the last, if you have any final comments.
No, I think that pretty well covers it for me. Eat safe, provide food safe. We'll all be good.
Thank you, Howard. Have a great day. Appreciate your interview.
You bet. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye now.